You're watching the free version of this tutorial. Upgrade to premium for all footage in project and exclusive content. In exercise 7, we're going to look at how we use Mocha's tracking data to do stabilization. And we'll also be looking at Mocha Pro's Stabilize module. So just by looking at a clip, we can see we do have quite a shaky little shot. Looks like it was handheld. And it's sort of bobbling around all over the place. So let's open the clip in the Mocha Pro plugin and see what we can do. When we're looking for a target to stabilize, there's two different things we can go for. If we're trying to stabilize a particular object, say for example someone's face or a body part, something like that, then we can draw our shape over that. If we're just trying to stabilize out some sort of general camera shake, as we are here, then we can just find an object, generally in the background area, that we can use as the basis for the stabilization. So something that stays still and is only moving because of the camera movement. And if we go to the end of our clip here, you see the camera just whip pans away. We're not going to be able to use that, so I'm just going to set an out point on my project and just zoom into that now. So if I wanted to stabilize around this signpost here, then that's where I would obviously draw my shape. I'm just going to come over and go to this board here. And I will call this one billboard track. Lovely. Now if we move down to the track parameters, the type of motion we choose to track is also going to be the type of motion that we can then choose to stabilize later. We're going to turn off shear because we're only going to be taking out translation, scale, and rotation. So we don't want the other stuff to confuse the results. And let's just track that backwards. Now I don't expect any problems with the track here. Lovely, and we'll just check this out with the surface. Range that there, looking good. Okay, so we'll just turn the surface and the grid on and just play that backwards. And at the moment, all I'm looking for with this surface is just to make sure that there's no wobbles or shakes or anything strange going on with that track. Even though it drifts out a little bit there, that's looking absolutely fine. Cool. Well, let's come back up to the top now and turn off the surface and the grid. I'm happy with our track. Turn off the transform tool as well while we're here. Now, once we've got our track, one of the things that we're going to be using quite a bit, especially when we start to work with the rotoscoping, is to lock an area down once we've tracked it. And we can do that if we turn on this quick stabilize mode at the top of the viewer. So if I hit play now on that, what's going to happen is it's going to use that tracking data to quickly stabilize out everything around the shape. So the shape itself is going to stay pretty static, and everything else is just going to move around it. And it's at this point here where we can also start to see if there's a lot of perspective shift and perspective changing going on in our background as well. So if that's happening, that gives us a good excuse to retrack that. But here, that's looking just fine. Now, if you're not working with Mocha Pro, then you're not going to have the Stabilize module. So what you can do with your transform data now is to take it out as regular tracking data and use it in your host system. And let's see how we do that. So we go to export tracking data and we pick our format, just as we did before. And I'm going to choose the After Effects transform data for position, scale, and rotation. Now, at the moment, this format is good for doing match moving. So it'd be good for having something that tracks on to this billboard here. But if I invert this, all of a sudden, we can now use this data to do stabilization. And we can either save it out or copy it to the clipboard, which is what I'm going to do. So let's exit the Mocha Pro plugin, come to the first frame of our clip in After Effects, and go Edit, Paste. Now, if I play that back, you can see that we've got a nicely stabilized out piece of footage. If I hit U to bring up all of our keyframes, you can see it's pasted in keyframes for position, scale, and rotation. And if for any reason we didn't want to stabilize out scale and rotation, well, it's just a simple case of turning off the keyframes on them and resetting the values. So now we have a position stabilize only. And we can scale that up so that it fits the borders and move it around and do whatever we need to do. But if we're working with Mocha Pro, we can do something else with this. Let's come back into Mocha and see what's what. Now back in Mocha Pro, it's obviously remembered our project that we had saved before, and I'm going to come into the Stabilize module. And let's hit play. So this is slightly different now, because instead of everything being completely stabilized out, we've got a bit of a smoothing effect going on. And the reason for that is because in our Stabilize, we have a lot more options for how we're going to use that tracking data to do our Stabilize. The first one we're going to look at is under Smooth. Are we going to be stabilizing out the X and Y translation? So the X and Y position. We can just stabilize one or the other, or both. That's kind of handy. Do we want to add rotation into the mix? Yeah. Do we want to add zoom into the mix? Fine. And if we tracked in shear and perspective, we can add these into the mix as well. And if we're going to do that, we might as well turn on all motion, and that'll just stabilize out everything that we have tracked. Cool. The next thing under smooth is how much we're going to be smoothing. At the moment, we have our number of frames set to 10. So Mocha is going to be looking around those 10 frames and sort of smoothing the transition between them. So instead of getting that completely locked off shot that we had before, we're still maintaining some of that camera movement. If we don't want that, if we do want it completely locked off, we can turn on maximum smoothing. There we go. Everyone's happy. Or alternatively, we can just dial in a different number here. So the lower we go down, the less smoothing we've got. And of course, at 0 frames, we are going to get no smoothing whatsoever. So if I take that up a lot more, 37, everything's a bit more stabilized. So there's less of that natural camera movement left. Actually, maybe we'll take that down to about 7. So we keep a little bit of the original movement, but it's just not as pronounced as it was. So now we've got our material smoothed out as we want it to. We've got this thorny question of what to do with the black areas here. The black areas are the bits where now we've moved stuff around and smoothed it all out. We don't have any original image left. And this can be quite hefty towards the start here. You can see that's quite a lot of black area we have. One of the things we can do in the Stabilize module is come down to our fixed frames and add to our frame list here. And what this frame list is going to do is it's going to say that I want on frame 36, I want to have the original position of this image back and preserved. So this is going to be a fixed frame. And we're going to come out to where it sort of drifts out over towards the end as well, maybe. Come to the last frame, just add the last frame in. And what that's going to do is it's going to just transition between frame 36 and frame 312. And if we play that back now, you'll see again that we don't have as much of that black border as we had previously. Now you can add as many new frames in as you want to, but I would counsel against it because these are going to be linear movements. So if the more frames you have and the closer those frames are together, the weirder that stabilization looks, because what you're essentially doing here is fighting against the stabilization. So it's cool if you're just sort of adding stuff to a movement over a sort of sizable number of frames. If you're just doing it every 5 frames, then that's not going to give you a good result. That's not going to look nice. It's going to give you a sort of weird DVE kind of look. So we've almost fixed our border problem, but we've still got a little bit of black border across the image. What are we going to do with that? Well, let's come to our Borders tab now and see what to do. And we've got 3 things in the Borders tab that can help us with our black edges. We have Center, which will center the footage around the area. We have Zoom, which will zoom us up. You see the difference? There we go. Center just moves everything into the center. Zoom zooms us up, so all of a sudden we don't have any black edges. And we have crop, which when we take this out or render this out, it will crop any of the unused stuff out. So we won't have any black edges at all. And when I applied center and zoom, these were things that I was able to preview in real time. But if I find, well, let's come back, where was it? Around about here, there we go. So if I come back to frame 88 and apply the crop, you don't see anything different here. Now we've got some new buttons available to us in the Stabilize module. We have our render buttons, and we can render backwards, render forwards, or just render the current frame using that process cog. So when I click on that render current frame, it's going to render that. And if we look up in the viewer now, we have a new thing in the drop-down menu that says Stabilize. So by using this drop-down menu, which we haven't really looked at before, we can go through the different footage that's available to us on this current project. So for example, we can have a look at the selected layer, which is our original clip. We can look at the Stabilize. We can look at our Stabilize input. We can check out our logos. Oh yeah, oh, that grid's looking good. And we can also have a look at the map that we used for the billboard. So that's just rendering that out for us. But let's get back to the original image and just go to the selected layer there, because we're going to come back to render just 2 seconds time. In this case, if I turn center and zoom back on, this is looking all right. We've got a smoothed out shot that's not overly stabilized, but has just taken away some of the harder edges that we had, or the harder motion that we had with the camera movement, except for the start, which is still a bit wonky. But I want to do something different with this. And to do that, I'm going to change a few things up. But I want to keep this project for later. So I'm going to come to File, Export Project, come to my folder, and I will call this one 07 Stabilize 1. And now I'm going to get rid of all of the things in my frame list. So to do that, I'm just going to go to the frames that are on my frame list and just hit delete. I'm also going to turn the smoothing up a fair amount and turn off center and zoom. Cool. And I'll move us to frame 65 because I want to show you something else now. I'm going to show you autofill, because autofill is a cool way that Mocha can do to fill in these black areas using other frames. So if I turn my autofill on now, it's going to give me a search range. So this is the range of the frames it's going to look backwards and forwards. And that's set to 10, which is, it's actually going to be pretty decent for this footage. And we'll come back to this in just a second when we start to need it a little bit more. So I'm not going to touch anything else here. Just going to leave the default settings as they are. And I'm just going to hit render, because we're not going to see anything with the autofill until we hit render. Oh, that's interesting. What's it done? Well, what it's done is it's looked at the shape that we drew in and said, okay, I can fill that shape in using other frames. Here we go. Boom. That's it. There's your shape. Now move along. Well, that's great. Perfect. Except for one thing. What if we wanted to have a bit more of this area filled in? We didn't just want this small piece here. Well, that's not going to be an issue either, because what we can do is we can always make this a little bit bigger. But if I start playing around with this shape now, I'm going to start adding keyframes to the shape size. That's not really what I'm after. So we've got a couple of ways of doing this. The first way is to use a way to change the shape across the entire range that we're working on. And if we come down to the bottom of the viewer, go to keys and have a look down here. We have a little U, the normal out over the top, and this turns on our Uber key. Now this is a very powerful, and if you're not careful with it, can be quite a destructive setting, because what this is going to do is that whenever I make a change along here to this shape, it's going to, oops, let's come over to our selected layer so you can actually see what it's doing. Yeah, what it's going to do is it's going to change that shape across the entire range. So I can make this really big across the entire range. Now, why would this be dangerous? Well, it would be quite dangerous if you'd already done a lot of animation stuff and a lot of keyframing stuff already, then turned on the Uber key and started playing around without any sort of worries about what's going on. What would happen there is that all your keyframes would still animate in. They'd just animate in with the offset that we created with the Uber key. Could be cool, could be very uncool. So what I like to do is once I've finished with the Uber key is just turn it off. So I can either just click on auto key one more time or just click on Uber key again, and that will automatically switch me over to auto keyframing. Let's Uber key this a little bit more, and I'm just going to bring this down just to show you what's actually going on. Render that one more time. And you can see where it's got information, it's going to fill that information in for us. If I turn up the search range here, not quite that high, let's set that to 30, for example. It's going to take longer to do the fill because it's going to take longer to search through the frames, but it's going to fill in a bit more detail. Take that, turn that to 40. There we go. And you can see it's, with those extra 10 frames, it's only found a little bit more there. If we've got lighting changes, we can start to model the illumination and we can dissolve things up as well. And that will try to mix the layers together in a slightly different way, dissolving the layers together in a slightly different way. So you can't see the slice as much, but it does add a long time to the render time, especially when we've got our search range turned up all the way to 40. That's crazy. We will look at model illumination and dissolve in much more detail when we go to the Remove tab. So for now, I'm just going to turn these off. The one last thing that we can do is we can just do a fill from background. And this is a lot faster to render out. And I'm just going to keep rendering this while I'm talking. Because what this does is instead of just doing it on the shape that we had available to us here, it's just going to try and fill in the whole background just with previous shapes to sort of match all that stuff in. So it means we don't get as good a result or as focused a result because it's just taking everything all over. But it does mean that we can fill in pixels that we otherwise wouldn't have just with something. And it's a much faster process. But you'll see there's going to be issues where we've got things moving, like at the bottom here, where we have the truck moving in and out, or the traffic moving in and out, I should say. It means that we are going to get slices of truck where we don't actually want that. So to avoid that, we can set up and render out different shapes across different planes, and that will give a much superior result. Let's take us back to where we hadn't rendered, which is frame 92, and we'll just render that backwards as well. Yeah, so you can see down at the bottom here, it's giving it a go, but it's not quite able to get 100% of what's going on because the movement of the truck is sort of mixing some of that motion up. But we are filling in a lot of detail. Cool, and if we play that back, it's quite an extreme result because by smoothing it out as much as I have, I've given it a lot to do and not a large search range to do it. Now, when working in standalone Mocha Pro or the plugin version of Mocha Pro, we can take this and we can always just export out our rendered clip. We can also export out that stabilized tracking data if we don't want to worry about the borders and the autofill, and we just want to worry about what's going on in the smoothing area over here with the fixed frames as well. We can take that out using the export stabilized tracking data and just copy and paste that as we did with the normal tracking data. And one other thing that we can do with the plugin version, let's just export this project out. Let's exit this. And actually, let's just come away from After Effects. Let's find our clip in Premiere. Let's bring this into Premiere and just merge that project. Boom, thank you very much. Just check that everything's same as it was. Yes, it is. Good. So let's just save and exit. What we can do with the plugin version of Mocha Pro is come back down to our module renders here. choose our module. Let's actually move us to a later frame. Choose our module, which is going to be Stabilize. And I can just hit render on this one. And that will go away and think about it and show us our render. Don't be expecting real-time playback on this. You will have to render it out to see the results. And depending on the settings you have in Mocha and the length of your clip and modeling illumination and all of that stuff, this could be a fairly lengthy render. I will just let that chug on through. And there we go. And on this clip, I would probably add in a few fixed frames to get rid of some of this here. But as an exploration of autofill, I think this sort of shows what's going on. So in this tutorial, we have seen a lot of stuff about stabilization. We've seen how we can export just basic tracking data and use the invert to turn regular transform data into data we can use for stabilization. We've also looked at how we can use the smoothing and the fixed frames to give us a more controllable stabilization, which involves smoothing instead of just locking everything down. And we've checked out what we can do if we're going to render stuff out using the borders or the autofill. And then rendering that either directly out of Mocha Pro or using the Mocha Pro plugin in your host application. In the next exercise, we're going to be exploring shapes a bit more and how we can start to use them not just for tracking, but for creating rotospines and doing rotoscoping. All fun stuff, so I'll see you in exercise 8.